Welcome to the Audit Informer, a platform for expert knowledge sharing and examining trends in the profession. In this interview, Dr. Negrini discusses how to identify the 7 patterns in numbers that can be used to detect fraud. He also talks about his paper, The Patterns of the Numbers Used in Occupational Fraud Schemes, recently published in the Managerial Auditing Journal.
So we're here in Ottawa with Dr. Mark Negrini, and we're here to talk about patterns in numbers, specifically to detect fraud. And I understand that you've written a paper about it, so you wanted to talk more about that and delve a little deeper. So what are the 7 patterns, Mark?
So actually we do have to start with what types of fraud we care about.
Okay.
So we care about good old embezzlement, and this is theft by deception and generally theft of something that has been entrusted to you. We also care about good old bribery, and in this college admission scandal, bribery has been, it's not a daily thing on the newspaper, but it's close to that. And then we care about financial statement fraud, which is where you issue deceptive financial statements in order to deceive investors or shareholders or lenders or something like that. So those are the 3 things we care about. And what I found was that the fraudsters generally like to use round numbers. This is one of their favorites. So numbers such as 5,000 or 8,000 or 16,000, they enjoy that. They also enjoy to use numbers that are rising at a rather rapid clip because they are just getting greedier and greedier as time goes by. They also like to have their numbers just be below some threshold, and this is usually the threshold at which they think they will be caught. Basically, if we look out of our window here, we see people driving, and they are driving at a speed just below what they think they can get away with without being caught.
Right.
They also like to sometimes round numbers strategically. So this could be something like unemployment statistics, where the government would like the number to be lower, and if they can round down, they would always try to round down because that makes governments look better as such. They also try to use numbers that don't follow Benford's law, sort of anti-Benford type numbers. Those come up in the fraud schemes. A favorite of mine is repeated numbers. And this would be where the accountant purposely overpays an amount, and the idea being that the refund that comes back is going to be diverted for his or her own use. And lastly, believe it or not, they like to use numbers that are outliers, and these are numbers that are outrageously big. And you would think that they would not use it, but I'm happy to say they do.
They're not very clever, are they?
They're not very clever.
No.
I would not call them the sharpest tool in the toolbox.
Right.
Yes. With hindsight, they're always not the sharpest tool.
So are there only 7, or are there more that have yet to be discovered?
So there might be newer patterns, but at least in all the cases that I've looked at, and I try to group them, and this research started in 2014. I don't know if you can remember, that was how many iPhones ago?
Right.
So in 2014, and I've basically just added to it and made it better and better and better. Now it's 2019, so finally after 5 years it got published in a journal. And this is the result of looking at lots of different cases. When I say lots, 50 or something like that. There might be other patterns out there.
Who knows,
I'll
right?
find them.
Yes, you'll find them.
I'll find them if they're there.
And have you found in your research that there are ones that are used more often than not? Or is there sort of a hierarchy of ones that are more indicative of fraud or not?
So, is there a hierarchy? That is pretty hard, except that second category that I mentioned, the numbers that are rapidly rising.
Right.
You know, they don't know when to stop. They have the scheme, it's working, and now I'm either using my P card to run my side business, or I figured out how to do it, and they don't know when to stop. And we can talk about this at the end, but Nathan Mueller, one thing from his own writing, he said, I joke when I stole 1 million in 2004, 2 million in 2005, 4 million in 2006.
Right. Why don't we talk about that since you brought it up?
We can talk about Nathan.
So what was his sort of response? What was motivating him to continue to do it, even though he probably knew inside that this is probably not the right thing to do?
Well, Nathan knew that he would eventually get caught. And I actually collaborated with Nathan, and Nathan and I wrote an article together while Nathan was in federal prison in Duluth, Minnesota.
Amazing.
So Nathan was in prison, And Nathan, the part that Nathan wrote was how I did my fraud, because that part Nathan knew.
Yes.
Then the part that I wrote was how we could have prevented and detected the fraud that Nathan actually did. And then we sort of wrapped it up with a bit of an introduction and things at the end.
Right.
And that article actually won the prize for the best article in 2014 for the Journal of Accountancy.
Excellent.
I'm pleased to say.
Yes, and you
So-
presented with him as well at
So I
conferences.
collaborated with Nathan.
Yep.
And then at the ACFE Global Conference in 2015, Nathan was the conference closer. So he was the end of the conference, here it is, Nathan Mueller, somebody that you would want to catch.
Right.
And so I was allowed to introduce him, and I had 2 sessions where I spoke about Nathan's fraud. I was sort of like the opening act, you know, for the musicians. I was Nathan's opening act.
Great, great. Okay. So
And he was
yeah.
smooth, good
He was-
looking, smooth, likable.
they all? Aren't they all,
my
right?
goodness. They are
Yeah.
all good looking and smooth and nice and highly liked. I one fraudster, Ryan. I said, Ryan, did they like you at work? He said, they even still like me now. I think he's pushing his luck there a bit.
Yeah.
That's what they feel. They are liked at work.
Right, right. And that's how they get the
That's
trust.
how you get away with
Yes.
it. Yes.
Yep.
And of course, fraud is abusing a position of trust. So you need to be put in the position of trust in order to abuse it, which is why when people say, oh, is there an age limit or something like this? There is actually,
Oh,
because
okay.
24-year-olds are not put in a high position of trust as being controller of a group of companies. You actually get that trust when you're older. So which is why these statistics will show it's older people that get caught for fraud because they can do it.
Okay, great. So going back to these patterns then and the different types of fraud schemes, are there certain types of fraud schemes where you see the patterns more? So are they associated? Can you kind of map them to these types of fraud schemes? You see these patterns, these types, you see this other pattern.
So of course we're talking about people, and we're talking about people that see a gap in internal control, and they are now exploiting this gap, and they do so in different ways. Probably the most regular thing that I see is when it comes to bribery.
Yes.
Bribes are round numbers.
Okay.
For all the cases I look at, it's round numbers, except one case I saw Rolls-Royce gave a Rolls-Royce to a customer. So when you give a Rolls-Royce to a customer, then it's not a round number,
Yeah,
it's
that's a
a
red
car,
flag.
and
Yep.
you have to value the car at $460,000 or something like that.
Okay.
But other than the Rolls-Royce, these are round numbers.
Okay. And in terms of relying on these patterns to develop like analytics tests and whatnot, are there any sort of pitfalls that we should keep in mind? For example, in your paper, you talked a lot about false positives being an issue in many of them. So are there any things like that we can reduce the number of false positives,
So
things
quite
to consider?
right. So with round numbers, there are plenty of valid transactions that are round numbers as well.
Yes.
So with round numbers, we are going to get lots of false positives, and it is going to be a case of slicing and dicing. Okay, so the fraud could probably not be something that was booked to an inventory account. It might not be this, and then you have to slowly whittle it down. But auditors need to realize that this is an iterative process.
Right.
It's not just press one button and then, as Jeff said earlier,
Yes.
press rerun
Yeah.
once.
And you immediately get
and-
your answer and you don't need to do anything else,
And
right?
you can go out and have
Yeah.
lunch, and you've caught the fraudster. No, iterative process and over again. Sometimes they've popped very fast. So for example, I was looking at one big airline, and we were looking for frequent flyer fraud. And this was where employees have figured out how to attach miles to their own personal frequent flyer account. And all we did was we ran a test saying who got the most miles last year.
Okay.
There at the top of the list, a whole page of people, 800,000 miles, 900,000 miles. You can't get 900,000 miles if you fly every day. But they got it because they were cheating the system and they knew how to game the system. So in that case, we just looked at the largest miles getters. They were at the top of the page, end of story.
So easy to find.
So
When-
easy to find
yeah.
in that case.
Yes.
In other cases, harder.
Okay, right. So going along those lines, so with respect to threshold numbers now.
Yes.
So I know you talked a little bit about Benford's Law already, and
Yes.
how can Benford's Law be used to detect structuring in things like avoiding reporting requirements for AML legislation?
So we had a very nice fraud case where the controller was in charge of 3 nightclubs, and she stole $2.5 million in cash from these nightclubs over a period of 2 years before she got caught. The way she was caught was, I'm not exactly sure how she was caught, but what the FBI proved in the court documents was that she was depositing amounts of $9,900 into her bank account regularly, and this is called structuring.
Right.
And so the way Benford would pick this up is these $9,900 deposits all have first 2 digits of 99. And 99 is the least likely first 2-digit combination. So if your account has got lots of deposits of 99 and 99 is the least likely first 2-digit combination,
it'll stand out
you might
for sure.
just be structuring.
Okay, right. So if someone understands how Benford's law
Yes.
works, is it possible to falsify numbers to be able to conform so as not to go detected?
So people might say, okay, you know how Benford's law works and you know about Benford, let me do a fraud that is very Benford. And I have a few things to say to that. Benford's law is quite complicated. We have expected proportions, we have actual proportions, we have a graph, we have mean absolute deviations. It's quite complicated.
Right.
Our average fraudster, not so clever.
As we said earlier.
Not so clever.
Yeah.
Number 2, when they're doing their fraud, and let's say they're doing their fraud in December of 2019, they don't know what 2019's data looks like because 2019 isn't finished yet. Today is the 16th, 17th of December. I'm doing my fraud. I don't know what December's data looks like, so I might actually pick something that will spike on a Benford's law graph. And number 3, if Benford's law is the only test that the auditor runs, I click, oh, it looks nice, end of audit? No. Benford's law should be my starting point for greater things to come.
Okay.
And what I saw in the idea demonstrations that I saw earlier today, Benford's law gets mixed in with a whole lot of other tests, the outliers and this and that, and that is the way it should work. It's part of the package.
The toolbox, right?
Part of the toolbox.
Right.
It's not the whole toolbox.
Right. So the auditor still needs to look at it all and make some judgments based on that, based on the outputs of all of those tests.
Because it is quite easy to have a fraud that just gets hidden in the mass. You can have 10 million transactions. A fraud might only use 12 transactions per month. These 12 will just get hidden in the whole bundle. So Benford's law is a starting point.
Okay, great. All right, and then outliers. So in a reporting setting, outliers tend to be bigger numbers. Are there other types of outliers that we should?
And actually, this is very important. There are other types of outliers, and the AICPA, they actually talk about items that are material, and what they say, it is not only big items that are material. For example, some item that changes a loss into a gain, even though it might be a small number, this is, it has a material effect on the financial statements.
Right.
Or something that makes you meet a loan covenant agreement stipulations, as opposed to missing it, even though the amount, the journal entry might be small that causes you to do it, that is material. Also something that might make you meet an analyst's forecast, as opposed to slightly missing it, even though the amount is small, it should still be seen as material.
So it's the impact of it as well. It's seeing what impact that change has to determine if there's a red flag as well.
You can be on my team.
Yes. Okay. And then lastly, I just wanted to close with, so we have regulatory bodies, we have the SEC, and we talked a little bit about AML. Are they using these sort of fraud patterns? Do they know about these fraud patterns in order to detect in their own testing, in their own examinations?
Yes, and I would love to say yes.
Yes.
However, the nice thing is, this published was paper in about May this year.
Okay.
And so everything is new, and so I'm sort of on my quest now to tell as many people as I can about it. And I am happy to say that I have presented twice this year to 2 federal government bodies, and at least getting them aware of these things like the thresholds and the round numbers and the rising numbers.
Right.
It's a slow process.
Right.
It's sad, but it's slow.
Yes, as anything. But I imagine they're not super surprised when they hear about it. It's just you've put it in a way that can be sort of digested, right? Bringing it down to...
I read the comments, and the comments are, oh, I never thought of this, or you packaged it nicely, and you showed me that these patterns actually exist. Yes. Because we intuitively think that there must be a pattern of some sort, and this was just putting it together with real court cases and real cases.
Right.
And nothing's more exciting than hearing about real fraud cases
studies,
and actual studies, even at 8:30 in the morning.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was great.